The cargo ship shook like a leaf in a hurricane as Mike Thompson fought to keep it steady. Red warning lights flashed everywhere, and the control panel was going crazy with alarms. Outside the cockpit windows, purple lightning crackled through the thick clouds of planet Vethera. This wasn't supposed to happen. The weather reports had said clear skies. Come on, Mike muttered, pulling hard on the controls. But it was no use. The electromagnetic storm was too strong. It was like trying to fly through a tornado made of electricity. The ship's engines gave one final scream before dying completely. Mike felt his stomach drop as the cargo hauler began its deadly fall toward the planet below. He had maybe 30 seconds to find somewhere to crash that wouldn't kill him instantly. There. A clearing between some rocky hills. It wasn't much, but it would have to do. The impact threw Mike against his safety harness so hard he saw stars. Metal screamed as it twisted and bent. Sparks flew from broken wires. Then everything went quiet except for the howling wind outside. Mike's head was pounding, and he could taste blood in his mouth. His left shoulder felt like someone had hit it with a hammer. But he was alive, and that was more than he'd expected a minute ago. He unbuckled his harness with shaking hands and looked around the wreckage of his ship. The cargo hold was completely destroyed. Boxes of medical supplies and food that were meant for the human colony on Kepler Station were scattered everywhere, most of them ruined. His emergency kit was still intact though, strapped to the wall near his seat. That was something. Mike grabbed the kit and activated his emergency beacon. The small device beeped once and showed a green light. Good. The rescue teams would pick up his signal and come looking for him. On a planet this close to human space, they'd probably be here in 6 or 7 hours. He was about to settle into wait when he heard something that made his blood freeze. It was a sound he'd never heard before, but somehow he knew exactly what it was. Someone was crying. Someone small and scared and hurt. Mike pushed open the twisted remains of his ship's door and stepped out into the storm. The wind hit him like a physical blow, and the cold rain soaked through his flight suit in seconds. But there it was again. A weak, pitiful crying sound coming from somewhere nearby. Through the rain and wind, Mike could see the ruins of what looked like a small town. The buildings were unlike anything humans built. They looked like they were made of crystal or glass, all curves and flowing lines. But now they were just broken pieces scattered across the ground. The storm had destroyed everything. Mike followed the crying sound, stumbling over chunks of crystal and twisted metal. His flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing more destruction with every step. Whatever had lived here, the storm had hit them just as hard as it had hit him. Then he found her. A piece of what had probably been a wall had fallen over, creating a small shelter. Underneath it, curled up in a ball, was the smallest alien child Mike had ever seen. She couldn't have been bigger than a 3-year-old human kid. Her skin was pale silver, almost glowing in the darkness, and she had huge purple eyes that looked up at him with a mixture of fear and hope. One of her legs was bent at a wrong angle. Definitely broken. And she was shivering so hard her whole body was shaking. The cold was killing her slowly. Mike knelt down next to her and spoke softly. "Hey there, little one. It's okay. I'm here to help." She didn't understand his words, but something in his voice must have calmed her because she stopped crying and just watched him with those big purple eyes. Mike looked back toward his crashed ship, where his emergency beacon was calling for rescue. Then he looked at the tiny alien child who was dying of cold and fear. The math was simple and brutal. His rescue team would arrive in 6 hours. This little girl wouldn't live for 2 more hours in this freezing storm. He could stay with his beacon and keep himself safe. That would be the smart thing to do. The logical thing. But Mike had never been good at logic when someone needed help. "Well, kid," he said, carefully scooping the alien child into his arms. She was so light it scared him. "Looks like we're going for a walk." He wrapped his thermal jacket around her tiny body, leaving himself in just his thin flight suit. The cold bit into him immediately, but the little girl stopped shivering quite so hard. Through the storm, Mike could barely see lights twinkling in the distance, high up on a mountainside. It looked like another settlement, maybe 10 or 15 miles away. In this weather, it might as well have been on the moon. But it was the only chance they had. Mike's feet were on fire. Every step sent sharp pain shooting up his legs as his worn-out boots finally gave up completely. The soles had separated from the tops hours ago, and now he was basically walking barefoot across sharp rocks and frozen mud. But he kept moving because the little alien girl in his arms was still breathing, and that was all that mattered. He'd started calling her Luna on the first night when they'd taken shelter under an overhanging rock. Her pale silver skin seemed to glow softly in the darkness, like moonlight on water. It wasn't much of a name, but it was better than calling her kid all the time. And somehow, when he said Luna, she would turn those big purple eyes toward him like she understood. The storm hadn't let up once in 48 hours. If anything, it was getting worse. The wind was so strong now that Mike had to lean into it just to stay upright. The rain felt like needles against his exposed skin, and the cold was so intense it made his bones ache. But Luna was warm in his arms, wrapped up in his thermal jacket, and that was what kept him going. On the second morning, Mike felt her forehead and knew they were in serious trouble. She was burning up with fever. Her breathing was shallow and fast, and when he tried to get her to drink some water, she could barely swallow. The broken leg was probably infected, and without proper medical treatment, she was going to die. Mike stopped walking and sat down on a flat rock, cradling Luna against his chest. He had one medical stim left in his emergency kit. It was designed to boost a human's immune system and help fight off infections. He had no idea if it would work on an alien, but he had to try something. His own injuries were getting worse too. His right arm was definitely dislocated from the crash, and he could feel ribs grinding together every time he took a deep breath. The medical stim would help him a lot more than it would help her. But when he looked down at Luna's pale face and saw how weak she was getting, the choice was easy. Mike injected the medicine into Luna's tiny arm. She whimpered once, then settled back against his chest. Within an hour, her fever started to come down. It wasn't a cure, but it bought them time. Time they desperately needed, because Mike was starting to realize just how far they still had to go. Those lights on the mountain didn't seem any closer than they had when he'd first started walking. Maybe it was just the storm playing tricks on his eyes, but it felt like he'd been walking toward the same distant glow for 2 solid days without making any progress at all. His legs were so tired they felt like rubber, and his empty stomach was cramping from hunger. He'd given Luna most of his food and water. She couldn't eat the human ration bars, but she could drink the water, and that was keeping her alive. Mike's own water was almost gone now, and he was starting to feel dizzy from dehydration. "Come on, Luna," he whispered as he forced himself to stand up and keep walking. "We're going to make it, kiddo. Just you and me against this whole stupid planet." She made a soft sound that might have been agreement. Or maybe she was just too weak to do anything else. The heating unit in his emergency kit had died sometime during the first night. The battery was designed to last for 72 hours, but the cold was draining it faster than expected. Now Mike was keeping Luna warm the only way he could, with his own body heat. He held her tight against his chest, letting his jacket and shirt trap what little warmth they both had left. It wasn't enough. He could feel her getting cold again despite his efforts. And he was getting colder too. His hands were so numb he could barely feel Luna in his arms, and his feet had stopped hurting because they'd gone completely numb. But he kept walking. One step, then another, then another. Sometimes he hummed songs he remembered from his childhood, old lullabies his mother used to sing when he couldn't sleep. Sometimes he talked to Luna about Earth, describing blue skies and warm sunshine and green grass. He told her about dogs and cats and birds, about ice cream and baseball games and the way rain smelled on summer evenings. He had no idea if she understood any of it. But her breathing stayed steady when he talked, so he kept talking. What Mike didn't know was that every word, every step, every moment of his impossible journey was being watched. High above the storm clouds, sleek reconnaissance drones moved silently through the sky. Their cameras were locked onto the strange sight below, a human carrying an alien child through conditions that should have killed them both days ago. The video feeds from those drones were being transmitted directly to a crystal palace built into the mountainside, where very important people were watching Mike's story unfold with growing amazement. King Thorn stood in his crystal observation chamber, watching the screens that showed him everything happening across his planet. At 400 years old, he had seen wars, natural disasters, the rise and fall of civilizations. He had watched his people grow from simple farmers into masters of technology that could reshape worlds. But in all those centuries, he had never seen anything quite like what was happening on the screens in front of him. A human was dying in the storm. That much was obvious. The man could barely walk anymore, stumbling every few steps as exhaustion and cold wore him down. His clothes were torn to shreds, his feet were bleeding, and he was clearly starving. Any sensible person would have given up days ago. Any sensible person would have stayed with their crashed ship and waited for rescue. But this human wasn't sensible. He was carrying something in his arms, wrapped up in what looked like the remains of his jacket. And he kept moving forward, step by painful step, toward the distant lights of the royal city. "Your Majesty," whispered Kale, his chief advisor. The old alien's voice was shaking with emotion. "The surveillance drones have confirmed it. The human is carrying Princess Lyra. Thorn felt like someone had punched him in the chest. Princess Lyra. His sister's daughter. The bright, curious little girl who loved to explore and ask endless questions. She had been visiting the border settlement when the great storm hit. When the rescue teams arrived, they found nothing but ruins and no survivors. Thorn had mourned her death for 3 days. She was his heir, the future of their kingdom. But more than that, she was family. He had loved that little girl like his own daughter. And now this human stranger was carrying her through a storm that had already killed dozens of seasoned warriors. How long has he been walking? Thorn asked, not taking his eyes off the screen. Nearly 3 days, Your Majesty. Our drones have been tracking him since he left his crash site. He has not stopped except to rest for a few hours each night. Thorn watched as the human stumbled and fell to his knees in the mud. For a moment, it looked like he might not get up again. But then he struggled back to his feet, adjusting his precious cargo, and kept walking. He gave her his medical supplies, Kale continued, reading from the drone reports. His food, his water, even his emergency heating unit. He is slowly killing himself to keep her alive. And he knows who she is? Thorn asked. No, Your Majesty. The human has no way of knowing he carries royalty. To him, she is simply a child who needs help. Thorn felt something twist in his chest. In his long life, he had dealt with thousands of aliens. Most of them wanted something from him, trade agreements, mining rights, military alliances. They were polite and respectful because they had to be, but they were always calculating, always looking for an advantage. This human was different. He wasn't trying to gain anything. He wasn't even trying to survive. He was sacrificing everything he had, including his life, for a child he didn't know, from a species he'd probably never met before. On the screen, the human had stopped again. He was talking to Princess Lyra, though the audio pickups couldn't make out the words over the howling wind. But Thorn could see the gentleness in his movements, the way he cradled her against his chest to share his failing body heat. He is singing to her, Kale reported, listening to the enhanced audio feed. Some kind of lullaby in the human language. Thorn closed his eyes. His people had legends about beings like this, heroes from the ancient stories who would sacrifice everything to protect the innocent. He had always assumed they were just myths, stories told to children to teach them about honor and duty. But here was a living legend, dying in the storm just outside his palace walls. Your Majesty, another advisor spoke up, perhaps we should intervene. If the princess dies because we stood by and watched. And if we reveal ourselves, we risk exposing our surveillance capabilities to the human government, another advisor argued. The political complications could be enormous. Thorn ignored them both. He was watching the human on the screen, seeing the way the man's legs shook with every step, the way his breathing had become labored and desperate. The human was at the very edge of his endurance. He had maybe an hour left before his body simply gave out. And then, as if the universe was testing Thorn's resolve, the human collapsed. Mike went down hard, rolling in the mud to protect Princess Lyra from the impact. He tried to get up, failed, tried again. On the third attempt, he managed to get to his hands and knees, but he couldn't stand. His body had finally reached its limit. But even lying in the freezing mud, the human kept Princess Lyra wrapped against his chest, shielding her with his body from the wind and rain. Thorn had seen enough. Captain Vex, he called to his guard commander. Yes, Your Majesty? Take a patrol out into the storm. Make it look like a routine border sweep. And make sure you happen to find 2 travelers in distress about a mile from the main gate. Your Majesty, if I may ask dash. You may not ask, Thorn said firmly. Just bring them both home. Alive. As his guards rushed to prepare for the rescue mission, Thorn kept watching the screens. The human was still conscious, still talking softly to Princess Lyra, still trying to keep her warm even as his own life slipped away. In 400 years of rule, Thorn had never seen courage like this. And he was about to make sure the galaxy never forgot it either. Mike's eyes opened slowly, like he was swimming up from the bottom of a deep, dark pool. The first thing he noticed was that he wasn't cold anymore. For 3 days, cold had been his constant companion, biting into his bones, making every breath hurt, turning his hands and feet into useless blocks of ice. But now he was warm, lying on something soft that felt like the most comfortable bed he'd ever experienced. The second thing he noticed was the light. It wasn't harsh like the fluorescent bulbs on human ships or the blazing spotlights in emergency rooms. This light was gentle and seemed to come from everywhere at once, like being inside a soap bubble filled with sunshine. The walls around him were made of some kind of crystal that caught the light and split it into thousands of tiny rainbows. For a moment, Mike just lay there, trying to figure out if he was dreaming or dead or both. The last thing he remembered was falling face first into the mud, his legs finally giving out completely. He tried to get up, tried to keep walking, but his body had simply refused to move anymore. And through it all, he'd kept Luna pressed against his chest, using the last of his strength to shield her from the storm. Luna. The memory hit him like a lightning bolt, and suddenly Mike was wide awake and trying to sit up. "Where's the kid?" The words came out as a croak. His throat felt like he'd been gargling with sandpaper. A tall figure appeared beside his bed, moving with the quiet grace that Mike was starting to associate with the aliens of this planet. He was dressed in simple gray robes that seemed to shimmer slightly in the strange light. His features were similar to Luna's, the same pale silver skin, the same large eyes, though his were a deep blue instead of purple. "She is safe," the alien said in perfect English, his voice carrying a musical quality that made Mike think of wind chimes. "Thanks to you, she will recover fully." Mike felt a wave of relief so strong it made him dizzy. "She's okay? Really okay?" "More than okay. Her fever has broken, her leg is healing properly, and she has been eating well. You saved her life, human." The alien pulled up a chair that seemed to be carved from a single piece of crystal. "I am Court Physician An. I have been treating both of you since the Border Patrol found you." Only then did Mike become aware of his own body. His feet were wrapped in soft bandages that smelled like some kind of medicinal herbs. His dislocated shoulder had been put back in place and was held steady by a sling made of material that felt like silk. The cuts and bruises on his face had been cleaned and treated. Someone had even given him a bath and dressed him in clean clothes. "Thank you," Mike said, and meant it. "But I need to see her. I need to make sure she's really okay." An nodded as if he'd expected this. "Of course. But first, you must understand, your ordeal has been severe. You were minutes away from complete organ failure when we found you. You have been unconscious for 2 days while your body recovered." 2 days. Mike tried to process that. It felt like he'd closed his eyes just moments ago, but his body certainly felt like it had been resting for a while. The bone-deep exhaustion was gone, replaced by the kind of comfortable tiredness that comes after a good night's sleep. "Can I see her now?" Mike asked. An smiled, an expression that transformed his stern features completely. "She has been asking for you constantly. Follow me." Mike discovered that his legs were shakier than he'd expected, but they held him up as An led him through corridors that looked like they'd been carved from the inside of a geode. Everything sparkled and gleamed, and Mike had to resist the urge to reach out and touch the walls just to make sure they were real. The room they entered was smaller than Mike's, clearly designed for a child. And there she was, sitting up in a bed that looked like it was made from carved moonstone, her purple eyes bright and alert. "Luna," Mike breathed, and she turned toward him like a flower following the sun. She started babbling immediately in her musical language, reaching out with both arms like she wanted him to pick her up. Her leg was encased in some kind of cast that glowed faintly, but other than that, she looked healthy and strong and completely unlike the dying child he'd carried through the storm. Mike moved to her bedside and gently took her small hands in his larger ones. She gripped his fingers with surprising strength and kept talking in her lilting voice, occasionally pointing at him and then at herself like she was telling him a story. "She has been worried about you," An explained, watching the reunion with obvious pleasure. "She would not eat properly until we showed her that you were alive and healing. It seems you have made quite an impression on her." Mike felt his throat tighten with emotion. This little girl had been through something terrible, had nearly died in that storm, but she'd been worried about him. "She's incredible," he said softly. "Indeed she is," An agreed. "You should know, human, the child you saved is not simply any child. She is Princess Lyra, daughter of the late Prince Keth and heir to the throne of Vethera." Mike's blood turned to ice water. He went so pale that An actually reached out to steady him. "Oh God," Mike whispered. "Oh God, did I accidentally kidnap royalty? She was hurt and scared and I couldn't leave her there. I didn't know who she was, I swear I didn't know." For a moment, Mike's mind raced through all the horrible possibilities. Interplanetary incidents. Accusations of kidnapping. Human-alien relations destroyed because he'd grabbed the wrong kid during an emergency. But then An did something unexpected. He laughed. It was a warm, genuinely amused sound that filled the crystal room with its music. "Peace, human. You saved the most precious life in our kingdom." An's eyes crinkled with humor. "Princess Lyra was visiting the border settlement when the great storm struck. We thought she was dead. You brought her back to us when we had given up all hope. Mike slumped back in his chair, relief and residual panic warring in his chest. So I'm not in trouble? Quite the opposite, Anne said, his expression growing serious again. King Thorn wishes to speak with you. He has been waiting for you to recover. Mike had thought the crystal corridors were impressive, but they were nothing compared to the throne room. The space was enormous, so big that his footsteps echoed despite the soft carpet beneath his feet. The walls curved upward like the inside of a cathedral, all made from the same glowing crystal he'd seen throughout the palace. But these walls were different. They seemed to pulse gently with their own inner light, creating patterns that shifted and flowed like slow lightning. At the far end of the room, on a throne that looked like it had been carved from a single massive diamond, sat King Thorn. Even from a distance, Mike could feel the power radiating from the alien ruler. Thorn was taller than the other aliens Mike had met, and there was something about the way he held himself that made the air in the room feel heavy. His skin had the same silver tone as Princess Lyra's, but it was marked with intricate blue patterns that seemed to glow faintly in the crystal light. His eyes were the deep gold of ancient coins, and when they focused on Mike, it felt like being examined by something vast and timeless. Mike had met important people before. Ship captains, colony governors, even a few Earth senators. But standing in front of King Thorn was different. This wasn't just political power or military authority. This was something older and deeper, like standing next to a mountain or an ocean. Approach, the king said, and his voice filled the entire throne room without seeming loud. Mike walked forward, trying not to let his nervousness show. Court physician Anne had given him clean clothes to wear, simple but well-made garments that fit perfectly despite being designed for aliens. But walking across that vast floor toward the crystal throne, Mike felt like a scruffy cargo pilot who'd wandered into the wrong building. When he reached the base of the throne, Mike wasn't sure what he was supposed to do. Bow? Kneel? Salute? In the end, he just stood there and waited for the king to speak. Michael Thompson of Earth, King Thorn said, and somehow he made Mike's ordinary name sound important. I have been waiting to meet you. Your Majesty, Mike replied, figuring that was probably the safe thing to say. King Thorn leaned forward slightly, those golden eyes never leaving Mike's face. I watched your entire journey through the storm. Every step, every fall, every moment when you could have given up but chose to keep going instead. You nearly died for a child you didn't even know. Mike shifted uncomfortably. All this attention was making him nervous. I just did what anyone would do. She was hurt and scared, and she needed help. No. The word came out with absolute finality. King Thorn stood up from his throne, and Mike was surprised to realize the alien ruler was actually shorter than him. But somehow, standing made Thorn seem even more imposing rather than less. They would not have done the same. In my 400 years of rule, I have dealt with thousands of beings from dozens of species. I have seen greed, ambition, fear, hatred, and indifference. But I have never witnessed selfless courage like yours. The king began to pace, his movements graceful despite his obvious age. Do you know what most people would have done in your situation? They would have stayed with their crashed ship and waited for rescue. That would have been the logical choice, the safe choice. Even if they had found Princess Lyra, most would have brought her back to their ship and hoped she could survive until help arrived. Mike opened his mouth to argue, but King Thorn held up a hand. But you didn't do that, the king continued. You looked at a dying child, an alien child from a species you knew nothing about, and you decided her life was worth more than your own safety. You gave her your food, your water, your medicine, your warmth. You carried her for 3 days through conditions that killed seasoned warriors. And when your body finally failed, you were still protecting her with your last breath. The throne room fell silent except for the soft sound of Mike's heartbeat in his ears. He didn't know what to say to that. It hadn't felt like courage at the time. It had just felt like the right thing to do. Michael Thompson of Earth, King Thorn said formally, I name you Veltar, Guardian of the Innocent. It is the highest honor our people can bestow, and no alien has ever held this title before. Mike felt his face flush. Your Majesty, I don't need any titles or honors. I'm just glad Princess Lyra is safe. But King Thorn wasn't finished. Our royal treasury contains wealth beyond imagining. Rare metals, precious gems, technology that could make you the richest human who ever lived. Name your price, and it is yours. I don't want payment for helping a child, Mike said firmly. Then perhaps land? We could grant you an estate on one of our most beautiful worlds. You could live in luxury for the rest of your days. No thank you. A position at court? You could become our ambassador to Earth, helping to build bridges between our peoples. Mike considered that for a moment. It actually sounded kind of interesting. But then he thought about his simple life as a cargo pilot, flying supplies to frontier colonies and enjoying the freedom of space. I appreciate the offer, but I like my job. I like helping people get what they need, even if it's just medical supplies or food shipments. King Thorn studied him for a long moment, and then something remarkable happened. The alien ruler smiled. It completely transformed his face, making him look younger and somehow more human despite his alien features. Your humility honors you even further, the king said. Very well, Michael Thompson. If you will not accept treasure or position, then accept this promise. From this day forward, humanity is under the protection of the throne of Vethera. Any who harm your people, any who threaten your worlds, any who seek to exploit your species, they will answer to me. Mike's jaw dropped. He might just be a cargo pilot, but he understood enough about galactic politics to know what that meant. Vethera was one of the most powerful civilizations in this part of the galaxy. Having their protection would change everything for humanity. Your Majesty, that's incredibly generous, but I can't accept something that big just for Just for saving the life of my heir? King Thorn interrupted. Just for showing the galaxy what true honor looks like? Michael Thompson, you have given me hope that there are still good people in the universe. That is worth more than you know. Before Mike could respond, Court Physician An appeared at his elbow. Your Majesty, the human rescue vessel has arrived and is requesting permission to land. Mike felt a pang of sadness. He'd only been awake for a few hours, but somehow this crystal palace was already starting to feel like home. And the thought of leaving Princess Lyra behind made his chest tight. Can I say goodbye to her? He asked. King Thorn's smile grew wider. Michael Thompson, you are welcome in my palace any time you wish to visit. Princess Lyra would be heartbroken if her favorite human disappeared forever. As Mike was escorted back through the crystal corridors toward the landing bay where his rescue ship waited, he carried with him more than just the gratitude of an alien king. He carried a treaty that would reshape humanity's place among the stars, all because he'd been too stubborn to leave a scared little girl behind in a storm. Sometimes, Mike thought, doing the right thing had consequences you never expected.